Well, thank you for joining us for today's Certified Livestock Manager webinar series for 2026. Today is August 3rd, 2026. And this is brought to you by the Ohio State University Extension's water quality team. Today we'll be talking about manure spill response and safety from one of our very own members of our water quality team, Jocelyn Ruble. And then toward the end, we're going to hear from Kyle Verhoff, who is currently doing a graduate research project. So you'll learn a little bit more about what he is up to. But before I introduce the speakers, couple things to add to your calendar. The next CLM webinar will be October 5th at 10 a.m. It'll be Dr. Chen T. Chen of Ohio State University, and he'll be talking about the intersection of agricultural and environmental economics. And then mark your calendar in the future for the December 7th CLM webinar with more information to come on that. One other event to mark to your calendars, there is a field day coming up on August 20th in Waldron, Michigan. It's a nutrient management field day. This is held every year, and it's a very good event, very well attended, highly recommended. So I know it's hard to see that flyer there on the right-hand side, but there's plenty of speakers on plenty of excellent topics. So any questions about that, reach out to one of us on the water quality team. Speaking of which, again, today's webinar is brought to you by the Water Quality Team, and that includes myself, Heather Torlina, Rachel Henry, Jocelyn Ruble, and Amber Emmons, and you can see everybody's territory up there. So if you live in one of these territories, again, feel free to reach out to any one of us with questions. We are happy to help. And also, there is our website if you want to see what we're up to, or if you have further questions about what we're up to. So today's webinar, I want to introduce the speakers. First, we're going to hear from Jocelyn Ruble, and she is a water quality associate here at Ohio State Extension. And then, like I said, a little later on, we'll hear from Kyle. Kyle is the ag educator over in Defiance County, also with Ohio State University Extension. So with that, if there are any questions throughout the webinar, please feel free to drop those in the Q&A or the chat box. And also, yes, there will be both CCA and CLM credits available for this live broadcast. So stay tuned till the end of the webinar, and we'll make sure you get that information for both CCA and CLM. And with that, Jocelyn, I think I'm going to turn it over to you, and let's go ahead and share your screen whenever you are ready.
Hopefully. All right. So with that, like Heather said, my name is Jocelyn Ruble. I'm a water quality extension associate. I cover Allen, Auglaize, and Mercer counties. I'm going to go over some manure discharge response and safety information today. So let's get into that. We're going to start off with just some basic definitions. Just a refresher. That's kind of what today's going to be, a refresher on those safety items that, sometimes we know all of this stuff, but, how life gets busy and everything. So we want to just kind of breeze over this stuff. So what does discharge mean, right? It means we're going to add any pollutant or combination of pollutants from a point source, all right, from a point source to waters of the state. Versus a manure spill, right? A manure spill is any unexpected, abnormal drainage, discharge, or release of manure. It does not include releases to those impermeable surfaces, right? So think like concrete, when that substance doesn't migrate off the surface or penetrate the surface and enter the soil. So obviously impermeable means it's not going to go through. And some other practice standards and just, kind of those regulations. There's a couple of different things we kind of want to kind of keep in mind. Obviously, we have those Ohio Regulatory Authority, so that's ODA, and Ohio EPA, and all of the standards are listed there. So we have OAC 901-10 and ORC 903. Those obviously govern those permitted concentrated animal feeding facilities and our certified livestock managers. We also have that zero discharge mandate, and this is under the Clean Water Act standards. So that's prohibiting that unpermitted discharge of manure or contaminated runoff to waters of the state. And of course, we have USDA NRCS practice standard 590 on that nutrient management, and that incorporates our soil risk assessments with our tri-state fertility guides to make sure we're meeting those agronomic application rates and not exceeding those. And then we also have standard 313 and 634. So this is going to govern the engineering design, structural integrity, and waste transfer for containment structures. Obviously, I'm not going to go into depth on all of these, but these are just a friendly reminder that, hey, these are things that exist. And if you want any more information on them, feel free to kind of look over those in your free time. But with that, we will get into some of the risk points for that manure discharge, some of the potential errors, application issues, and how all of these different things can kind of play into effect. Now, obviously, they're kind of set up here as 4 different categories. We all know they don't run separately, right? They will mix together. Human error and human factors obviously affect a lot of these other issues. So we do have those land application errors, right? Over application, application near waterways or weather changes, those equipment failures, whether that's hose ruptures, valve failures, spills, anything like that. We have storage structure system failures, right? So we have the structure failures, pumping errors. Maybe we didn't account for enough freeboard in those, and we have some overtopping during those storm events there. And we also have some human factors, right? Inadequate training, poor communication, lack of emergency planning. So that's kind of what we're going to try and touch on today. But then we also have some with the land application that aren't mentioned. We have those subsurface risk pathways. So that includes your macropore flow and your preferential transport. So we want to keep in mind, especially during these dry times on those cracked soils, that manure can rapidly bypass the soil matrix, okay, whether that's through earthworm channels, root channels, those soil cracks, and it can get in those tile lines very, very quickly. And then those direct tile inlets as well, those surface risers, those can act as a direct conduit channel to the surface waters if surface runoff occurs. I also want to touch on here, under the human factors, maintaining aerial maps, right? And kind of knowing where all of the necessary points are at, whether that's flow pathways, slope, inlets, all of that stuff. We want to make sure that we have those things kind of known, and we can kind of put that in our emergency planning as well. So with that, what happens if we do have a discharge, right? We know the 4 R's for nutrient management. We're going to call these the 4 C's. I think they've been called that before, but we want to basically control the source, right? We want to stop those pumps, close off our shutoff valves, and halt that manure release as safely as possible. Remember, everyone's safety during all of these is our top priority. We want to contain the spill, whether that's, plugging those tile inlets, straw bales, whatever it may be. And we want to clean up all of the spill as well. And we want to contact authorities within those 24 hours. Okay, so there are required statutory limits for reporting for ODA DLUP and Ohio EPA, just to make sure that we are following all of that there. And I can add in, let's see, here's a couple phone numbers. I can put those in the chat here when we get towards the end. That way everybody has those in case they don't have them, and that's for ODA, Division of Soil and Water, and the Ohio EPA spill hotline. So this is a paper or a plan, I should say, that has been going around for a little while. I'm unsure of where it came from. I believe it came from ODA originally here. And I have it scanned in 2 different sections. So this is kind of the top half. And on the next slide, it'll be the bottom half. But it is just a really good emergency response plan, just something to keep on hand and look at. You don't have to have all of the answers immediately if you have it documented someplace, right? So if there's a storage facility spill or anything like that, we have those steps there where we're going to stop all of our activities, stop the flow, call for help. Maybe we need an excavator, right? We're going to get that. We're going to complete that cleanup and repair, and we're going to assess the extent, right? And if we need that help, we are going to get it. And then this also outlines the steps for transport and land application if there's a spill or leak. Similar steps. Again, we're going to stop all of those activities and stop the flow. That's our main step, right? Call for help. Call traffic control, right? Maybe this material is on the roadside and we need to get it off there. We want to contain that runoff. We want to plug those tiles, and we want to assess that emergency extent as well. Okay. And so the second part of this is just the emergency contacts. Now, I know today everybody has smartphones, right? Everybody can usually Google these. Sometimes though, it is just quicker just to type in that phone number where we don't have to search for it, or maybe it's in your contacts, but your contacts switched from organizing them from first name and now it's organized by last name and it's not where you thought it was. Okay, all of these things can take up that time. That is very important and necessary that to be used properly during an event like this. So if we have a sheet like this in each of the vehicles or, someplace very accessible for every person, we can hopefully kind of eliminate, unnecessary time and make sure that the necessary people are getting contacted, whether that's departments or agencies or organizations. And with that as well, in this middle section, the nearest available excavation equipment and supplies, right, for responding to that emergency. Now, obviously, it's going to depend what location you're at, what field you're in, who's closest to you, that sort of stuff. But just in general, if something would happen, we have a person or multiple people with proper and updated working contact information, not just, my grandpa knew this person down the road, and sometimes he'll answer his phone, sometimes he doesn't. You know what I mean? Something like that. Or his equipment is probably buried in the back of the shed. Like we all do, it gets busy, right? We got to shove the equipment that we are not using towards the back, right? Because we don't need it right now. But then again, if I have to move 6 pieces of equipment to get 1 piece of equipment out, again, that's wasted time. So we want to make sure that we have the equipment type that we need, the person, a working phone number, and that they know where the equipment is and can get to it in a timely manner as well. So we do just kind of want to make sure we have all of this, and this is perfect to have, again, like I said, in those vehicles for people, especially if we're training new people, that way they have that information. So what are some steps to take? And obviously this is all according to ODA, DLEP, and all of the regulatory permitting agencies, whether that's EPA and all of that stuff. So that's where all of this information is coming from. We can see here that we want to report by telephone, okay, after the first acknowledgement, okay, so not after I get it stopped, not 2 days later, after the first acknowledgement of a discharge or spill in no more than 24 hours. Okay, so this is a very timely manner. It's, oh, I told so-and-so, and then maybe we forgot about it and then we did something 2 days down the road. Technically, that's not allowed, right? So we want to make sure that we document the time at which that spill occurred and was discovered, right? The amount and characteristics. What did it get into the waters of the state? Because that changes the whole ball game. Did it get into the water? Did we stop it before the water? What happened to create that discharge or spill? Was it the weather? Did we have equipment failure? What kind of happened there? Who all is aware of it on your team? Who's their names, their phone numbers? That way we can contact. And when I say we, I don't mean me, I mean ODA. ODA can contact whoever is, aware of this, make sure that the story is aligned and everything is being taken care of that the way that it needs to. And what are the other steps that are currently being taken to kind of clean this up? And making sure that we have all of that. There also is going to be a part on a written report, which we will get to here in just a second. So you do have to file a written report of the occurrence in letter form within 5 days following the first knowledge. Okay, so this is similar with our previous slide where someone had to have been contacted within the 24 hours by phone. This is within 5 days of that first knowledge of it, not 5 days after the fact that it got cleaned up, 5 days within that first acknowledgement. Okay, so the DLEP office phone number is up there during the regular business hours, or there is an after hours number up there as well. If that discharge does reach the waters of the state, and that owner or operator is required to call them. That's EPA's spill hotline there at that 9378 number. So if something happens and we do need to notify local authorities, again, the owner operator is required to do that. And there is nothing wrong with providing photographic evidence, whether that's for your sake, for maybe the reporting agencies have some questions. If you're, documenting the source, anything that you have done, right? You put in tile plugs, you're cleaning up the site, or there was certain ground conditions, anything that can kind of help with the accountability of this and really show that you're working with them rather than against them. Obviously, that's going to help everybody out. So with that, again, we have that written report, and that will go to the address listed down here at the bottom. Within the 5 calendar days following that first knowledge of occurrence, unless otherwise waived by the Director of Ag. Okay, again, that's not something that typically happens very often. So for everyone's sake, within 5 days of following that first knowledge. And this could be another thing that you take a picture of, right? We all know how the postal system is at the moment. We can mail things in and sometimes they don't get there. So maybe taking a picture of, hey, look, I mailed this out, make a copy of it, right? That way you have it in case somebody says, hey, well, it didn't get there. Or even maybe if they have an email, send an extra copy that way as well. Just to kind of cover your back and make sure you're taking the correct steps with all of this if something would happen. So what are some of the containment equipment and tactics? Again, we saw on that piece of paper the equipment type and the contact person and phone number. If a manure discharge or spill happens, there's not a one-size-fits-all solution. Okay, that's not something I can sit here and tell you, oh, you need to do X, Y, Z, right? It depends on the type of manure. It depends on the time of year, the field, what's the slope, where's your waterway, right? Like, so there's all of these different things that you as the operator you have to be cognitive of, right? And have the ability to make those decisions quickly and effectively in the field. So whether that means you need to make berms and dikes, right? You want to have that equipment on hand, whether that's a backhoe or a skid steer, or maybe there's a contractor on call that we have there. Maybe we need a vacuum truck. That way we kind of have all of that information listed and we can get that as needed. Tile plugs, obviously, we want to keep those tile plugs on hand in those application vehicles, probably multiple of them, right, in case something happens. Not just one, we want to have enough. Also straw bales, we want to make sure that we have those as well, or at least someplace readily available. Shut-off valves, okay? We want to make sure that we have dual inline shut-off valves on our agitation units and our hoses, just to make sure we can shut everything off. But not almost all the way off, right? There's a little bit coming out. No, we want to make sure they shut all the way off and they work properly. And it doesn't take us forever to shut those valves off, right? That they work properly the way that they're supposed to and nothing is broken. Obviously, we want to make sure that we're checking this stuff over before we start our application, which you should be doing already. And then that emergency tillage if needed, right? We kind of can use a disc or a chisel plow to kind of create those flow paths and slow that stuff down. But again, is this equipment easy to get to, right? Does everyone know where it is? Who do we need to call? It's not buried in somebody's barn someplace, or the key is misplaced and it's hanging up over in this person's house or here and who knows what happens. We all know how life gets. We want to make sure that we have all of these things. We have this step, we have this plan ahead of time, right? It's preventative maintenance, just like you get an oil change in your car. That way, well, the motor doesn't blow a little bit down the road. Preventative, that way we don't have these issues. And everybody is on the same plan. So with this, what happens if it gets into waters of the state, right? We did all of this stuff. We've done the 4Cs. We've got it contained. We've got our dams and we've got all of this. What else can we do, right? Well, we can aerate. Why do we need to aerate? Well, obviously, that manure causes that microbial breakdown, and that causes that dissolved oxygen level to plummet. Okay, it doesn't provide treatment for ammonia or any of those other pathogens. Unfortunately, during those warm seasons, that dissolved oxygen level, they're already usually very low. So fish kills will probably happen if a spill reaches the water during this time. It doesn't mean that we need to just ignore it, that we don't need to aerate, right? Aeration is kind of demonstrating that secondary recovery tactic rather than primary containment, which is what those 4Cs focused on. Okay, so we want to demonstrate, hey, this happened, but I'm actively doing this. Well, how do we get the aeration? What do I mean by aeration? Well, guys, there's many different ways that this can work. Most people, I think, they usually just take a pipe and drill some holes into it, and they have it set up with, kind of the quick release inputs for the air hoses and the air compressors. Usually those are on, pretty standard with manure equipment. And that way they can have it and get it in there. So what happens if we get it in there and now it's maybe working, but it's working too well? Well, that can be an issue as well, right? We don't want to provide so much power and so much oxygen into that water that we're just stirring up debris and sediment. That causes a lot of other issues for our aquatic ecosystems and all of the fish in there. So we just want to make sure that we have that steady amount of aeration in the streams and water there. So with this, what are some other hazards that we kind of need to be made aware of? Those toxic gases, right? And our flammable gases. We have hydrogen sulfide, ammonia, carbon dioxide, methane. What about our equipment hazards? We have some of those, whether it's PTO shafts, agitators, confined space hazards. We have our pits and our tankers and our storage structures, right? And just due to the nature of our storage structures and agitation, those gases can accumulate in ways that maybe we're not always thinking of, right? Which is unfortunate, but those gas movement and concentrations are really hard to predict. So obviously we want to make sure that we're aware of those explosion hazards and anything with the flammability there. We don't want to rely alone on smell. Obviously, hydrogen sulfide is highly toxic and it can kind of accumulate around those storage areas. We want to maximize that ventilation where it's possible too. We want to remove those people and animals from those high risk areas before we start, especially around our agitation stuff. Just because it's an open structure, we don't want to assume that it's safe just because it's outside, right? Just because due to the gas movement and kind of those concentrations, they can just go many different places, and it might go places that you don't think it would go. So we want to make sure we're using those appropriate respiratory protections, those safety systems, and trained personnel. I'm not going to touch on confined space procedures a lot in this. Obviously, I think that is something that experts do need to talk on, and I am not an expert by any means on that. So that is a whole other topic in itself there. But this chart here does just show those kind of physical properties of those different gases and those safety risks, right? So that hydrogen sulfide, it's heavier than air, so it's going to sit lower. It's going to collect in those low spots and pits. Methane's lighter than air, but obviously highly flammable. Carbon dioxide, heavier than air, but also odorless. Anything that displaces that oxygen, well, that's a problem. And then ammonia is lighter than air and can cause that severe respiratory tract irritation. The exposure thresholds are listed there, and that will kind of lead us into the gas monitoring equipment. And the picture I have provided is not a good picture due to the sheer fact that monitoring equipment is not where it needs to be, right? It is on somebody's leg. It is not up by where they're breathing on that breathing zone. It is not, maybe on that collar, on the shirt, obviously anywhere where it needs to be. And that one is only a singular gas monitor. So that 4 gas detection monitor obviously would be the most ideal. We want to make sure that it's calibrated properly, right? We're testing for that oxygen and all of those gases. And obviously, if you would have to go into a space, excuse me, you want to test from the outside. Okay, top, middle, bottom, make sure that we're getting those areas where all of those gases can kind of move around. We want to wear it the whole time, okay, that we are working. And then listed below are some of those evacuation limits as well. So with this, I did not put the 4Cs back on here. I did kind of a little bit of a different format here, but it's the same information, right? We want to stop, want it contained, we want to correct it, and we want to call the correct people in the correct time frame, right? If there's a problem, no one should try to fix it on their own, right? We want to notify those others and create that plan. Yes, you might have done this, 6,000 times before and it was fine, and you didn't have a problem, but it only takes once, right? And there's a lot of hazards when it comes to all of this manure work, whether that's gases, low oxygen. Obviously, it's not worth risking anyone's life with that. A good field can become a poor site under the wrong conditions. We've got to remember that water flow follows the easiest route and that we have to protect our people first, right? Again, that preventative maintenance is what I'm going to call it there. We want to have that emergency plan before we need it, not during or after the fact. Unfortunately, most safety standards and recommendations with this, have been written either in the blood of others, in the fines of others, or in the collapse of different ecosystems and that sort of stuff. So all of these things to get to this point have had issues arise, and that's why we're here. So we want to make sure that we are preventing all of this stuff. We also want to make sure that we document everything. Accountability is huge. If you follow all of the steps listed and you're documenting everything you're doing and you're showing that accountability and kind of being ahead of the game, right? Rather than trying to sneak out the back, like, well, I can kind of, fudge this a little bit and this, that, and that. Well, that doesn't really look the greatest, right? We want to make sure we let the necessary people know in a timely manner. And that, that accountability, again, is huge with that. And with that, I don't know if Kyle is on yet or not, but my contact information is listed below. And if not, I'll stop sharing here.
Actually, Jocelyn, thank you. It's always good to get a update and a refresher on manure safety, and no matter how long you've been working around manure. Yeah, I do have a question or two if you have a minute. Let's see. Do you know if there are any different rules for reporting spills, whether it's based on which type of manure, whether it's swine or dairy? Are there different rules for different manure types?
I don't believe, and obviously don't quote me on this, but I don't believe it is based on type. I know there are different regulations though based off of size of
Mm,
operation, right? So like kind of our smaller operations and some of those, and it could go into type on that. I would have to double check. They don't have to report uh, to all of the same agencies. It still is the same, but I think they report to soil and water first
okay.
versus our more of our CLMs and stuff do report to ODA, DLEP, and then obviously EPA for the
Okay.
surface water
Actually,
stuff.
you might have answered my next question, but just to clarify, so if somebody notices a manure spill,
Hmm.
Um, would they contact Soil and Water or ODA first? What would be their first course of action?
And I did say had those phone numbers.
Oh,
Uh,
yes.
I I would contact, obviously, you can contact Soil and Water. You can
Mhm.
contact that DLEP hotline. There is also an Ohio EPA spill hotline that I believe anybody can contact as well. And hang on here.
Okay.
Those should
Probably those
be,
numbers are a good idea.
yeah, they
And it
are.
was also a great idea to have them in your phone, ready to go. Because
Yeah.
I know how I work too. When you're kind of scrambling, you sometimes don't know where they are in your contacts. So yeah, I see we put those numbers in the chat. So again, always a good idea for everyone to kind of make sure those are handy. So, all
For
right.
sure. And then obviously also just making sure that you're in accordance with those practice standards that we had touched on in the beginning, with that 590, with all of our, those zero discharge mandates for the Clean Water Act and all of that stuff, making sure that we're in accordance with all of those uh, as well with any of this stuff.
Do you know if someone will be penalized if from having a manure spill if it doesn't move off the site?
I believe all of the penalties and fines are at the discretion of ODA,
Hmm.
and obviously we want to make sure even if it doesn't move off of the site that they are still contacted. Those statutory guidelines and regulation exist for a reason. So we want to make sure that we're meeting those timeframes. Even, let's say it doesn't move off the site. That doesn't mean I have, 6 days to fix the problem, right? We still want to make sure we're fixing that problem within a timely manner, and we're notifying those sources with or without the fact and the looming overhead, right, of a fine or a fee or some sort of issue like that. We just want to make sure that we're notifying those correct people. That way, in the future, if there's an issue, maybe, a different issue arises, hey, we have demonstrated we have the accountability and the proper, we do the right thing, right? And it follows us in case there's an issue in the future. And obviously, that will never hurt you.
Fantastic. Well, no, Jocelyn, thank you for your time. I appreciate it. And with that being said, I think we're going to move to our next speaker. Kyle Verhoff again is present. And Kyle, whenever you are ready to start sharing your screen, go for it.
Okay, so I'm going to give you guys a brief introduction to. Oh, gonna have to change screens. Popped up to a different one. A brief introduction to some of the research that I am currently working on, as well as hoping to work on more in the future as we hear back from some grants and whatnot to give us the funding to really explore some options, particularly assessing manure when we're applying it to a standing forage like alfalfa. Um, I guess I should introduce myself a little bit before first. I'm Kyle Verhoff. I am the Defiance County A&R educator. Um, I'm currently doing my PhD work with OSU in the forage department. Um, a lot of the reason I pursued my PhD and some of the research I'm going to talk about is from producer questions coming in asking how do we utilize manure in forages? What's the best option? When's that nutrient available? So hopefully we'll be able to answer some of those questions and then some even more if we get the funding for it. So uh, I got four different sort of sub projects as part of this one grant proposal. Um, a big portion of it, and the one we'll do uh, pretty much no matter what, it's just going to be depending on the scale of the funding of what we do, is a multi-state field trial comparison of spring manure applications versus fall manure applications, looking at that timing of when our manure is applied, when is it available for a crop, and how does that impact uh, the yield on the first cutting, the second cutting, third cutting, and then hopefully be able to decipher a little bit more on uh, what supplementation can we use for that manure. Since that manure is going to be breaking down, that availability is not going to be right away. Do we need to supplement after first cutting to help boost the productivity of second cutting while some of those nutrients are still breaking down and being made plant available? So this project is looking to be a collaboration between Ohio, Minnesota, and Nebraska, looking at all of our different climates, all of our different sort of methods in manure application. Um, we'll do that assessment of the nutrient timing from a yield standpoint. So, what cutting yields what, and when are we seeing that benefit from that manure, as well as a quality standpoint. Um, how's that manure source, that application, that timing affecting some of our proteins, our digestibility, um, our ash, and our concentration of contaminants and stuff like that. The breakdown of the timing applications will be a fall application, a spring application, and then a 2-year fall application. So fall of 27, fall of 28, and then a 2-year spring application, 27 and 28. And then a control where we don't do any applications, so we can sort of look at the natural progression of that alfalfa without any additional supplementation. We'll do alfalfa yield, so total yield over the growing season, as well as breaking it out into the timings for each cutting. Alfalfa quality, again, looking at the proteins, the digestibilities, a couple of the different nutrients in that, like calcium and whatnot. And then utilizing soil tests to sort of give us a bit of a curve or a trend on when that availability is happening. NPK being the big ones there. We'll break down that nitrogen into nitrate and ammonia, so we can look at sort of the availability of the nitrogen from that manure source. And then manure type, method, and variety will vary from state to state. Our limitations on phosphorus in Ohio are a little bit different than the concentrations in Michigan, where they need to inject that manure. They can't do that broadcast application. So each of those applications will be specific to the regions and sort of the legislation and regulations around them. The second part will kind of build off of and be able to take some of the samples from that first project, where we're going to try to quantify the sulfate in manure, as well as how that ends up being available to alfalfa. So this one will be taken care of by another master's project. A different graduate student will work on this one mainly. But this one's going to look at developing predictive trends for sulfur uptake and availability when applying manure into an alfalfa stand. We'll use manure sulfate testing in manure up to 6 different types, and then not only look at what's that sulfur when we apply it, but then to plant total sulfur and sulfate, as well as soil sulfate. Trying to build out a little bit of a trend or a recommendation for when that sulfur is available and being taken up by the plant. These last 2 projects sort of tie together. We're really looking at the environmental impact on manure from a standpoint of precipitation and moisture cycling. So we're going to look at manure in what are called mesocosms. So they're essentially just very small controlled plots where we can control the environment a little bit better than in a larger on-farm plot scale style of trial. So these ones will be measuring and assessing the difference in nutrient utilization by alfalfa under different precipitation quantities, as well as wet-dry cycling. So we'll look at precipitation restriction in our small plots, and I'll have a picture of the mesocosms that we've designed for this trial. The 5 manures that we're going to be looking at here are layer chicken, beef pen pack, liquid dairy, liquid swine, and then a no manure control. Again, a lot of these are built out of the interest from producers in the area. Defiance County has a nice layer facility, so I've been getting a lot of questions on when to utilize chicken litter in general for alfalfa. A big concern is that contamination risk. If we're using a solid manure and a standing forage, if we don't get enough precipitation or enough weathering of that to break that down fully before the next harvest, that resource, that beneficial manure application becomes a little bit of a hindrance and contamination when we take it off with hay, and if we're picking up any of those solid manure clumps. For the mesocosm here, we'll be restricting the precipitation when going into precipitation and environmental research, trying to simulate rainfall is actually a fairly difficult thing to do. So I'll show you how we're going to try to restrict rainfall and use the natural rainfall to our advantage in this system. We'll be looking at alfalfa quality, yield, and then soil tests as well to look at that manure nutrient availability as we see changes in precipitation. So this is the mesocosm sketch. Please bear with me. I am no artist, but essentially our mesocosms will be 50-gallon barrels or 55-gallon barrels. So very small, but it gives us the opportunity to be very controlling with our weather variables. On top there, you can see we'll have a sort of slanted greenhouse style roof that we can remove very easily by unhooking this bar and allowing it all to curl to this front side. That will allow us to restrict precipitation while still allowing light interception at a normal and consistent rate. Be able to use that natural rainfall. One of the biggest problems with a lot of our precipitation studies is it's very difficult to simulate actual raindrop physics. When we're dropping rain from the sky, the terminal velocity and the actual impact of that raindrop is very difficult to get with a simulated precipitation. Another one that is a big challenge that is overcome by this sort of structure is the issue of lateral flow. When we have in-ground plots, a lot of the precipitation research takes very good care to not allow any lateral flow over the surface of the ground or through the subsurface of the ground. So that takes quite a bit of buffering. There's still some uncertainty about that subsurface lateral flow, if you can fully control that. So isolating this in a barrel allows us to sort of control that. I do have a couple options for subsurface water collection and surface water collection for this system if in the future that's a direction we want to go. It happens to be perfect at the 55-gallon barrel. If you put a 4-inch tile at the bottom of it, it's fairly close to what a natural tile setup would be. So what we'll do is create these, allow them to settle, and then we'll establish some alfalfa in there and do our different treatments. These will be very manually controlled on whether or not they will be allowed precipitation. We're shooting for about roughly half the precipitation of a natural spring. So every other rainfall, they'll be covered. But if we have subsequent rainfalls where we start adding up a bunch of moisture, the soil must get down to 10% moisture before we allow it to get more rainfall. Just as a precaution in case we get a stretch of rain that doesn't allow that wet dry cycling that we're trying to impose upon this. And then the final one is a greenhouse study that goes along the same lines. With the mesocosm study, we are still out in the environment and might have some issues with control. This greenhouse one will give us a lot of precipitation control, even though we will run into some similar issues with the raindrop physics. But this one will have trays of soil with all of those manure sources on top of them. And then our treatments will be a 2-inch rainfall all at once, and then a 1/2-inch rainfall twice a week for 2 weeks, and 1/2 inch once a week for 4 weeks. So the cumulative rainfall will be 2 inches for all of these trials, but will allow different levels of wet dry cycling to occur before we test what nutrients were removed from that manure source and what nutrients were available in that soil. So we'll use manure tests and soil nutrient tests in this case to assess how that moisture cycling and precipitation rate affects manure. That's really what I've got. The big thing here is just trying to utilize manure on standing alfalfa. having a better understanding of those practices so we know when that nutrient's available, when we can apply manure safely. Um, and yeah, just have a better overall agronomic assessment of utilizing manure on alfalfa.
No, Kyle, that sounds great. We look forward to hearing more about the results. Quick question: how did you get interested in this topic? Did you have a background in it, or is this what happened?
So yeah, my master's is in grazing and forages. So I have a natural interest in that, but I'm up in Northwest Ohio, so there's not nearly as much grazing as something like in Southern Ohio. So alfalfa was very much the uh, avenue to go to still look into forages. And then it's just really been producer questions on manure utilization. It's a big topic up in Northwest Ohio, so just having an understanding of that, and then just looking for opportunities to utilize it in alfalfa and just better understand it.
Yeah, that sounds great. Well, no, thank you for being here with us today and sharing that information and both you and Jocelyn, thank you very much for being here. Again, if anybody has any questions for either Kyle or Jocelyn, please feel free to leave them in the chat. I'll give everybody just a few minutes. All right, I want to thank everybody for joining us here today. And again, I'll leave this up here. And if there are any questions for our team, there we go. Please feel free to email us at waterqualityassociates@osu.edu. But with that, I want to thank everybody for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next time.